You're listening to the Career Plus Life Catch-Up, episode number 58. Welcome to the Career Plus Life Catch-Up, a show anchored in reality to help you create a balanced life where you enjoy both your work and your life, because you don't have to choose. I am your host, Cecile Ferry, a corporate executive turned coach and working mom. This is your place for insights, advice, and tools to optimize your career direction, balance, and confidence. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for bearing with me as I am juggling everything happening in life. So I hope you are all well, and welcome to April. If you're hearing this episode live, can you believe 1 quarter of the year already is underway? I hope 2022 has been good to you so far, and that you're looking ahead with a lot of excitement and anticipation with what's yet to come. So just looking back, March just went really quickly. It was a beautiful month for me. I had my daughter's birthday to organize, and that's always fun. I have been working on a new life coaching program, so stay tuned. When it's ready, I will be talking to you about it, but I am very excited. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of you. I've been working with my beautiful clients. Shout out to all of you, my clients, current and past, and maybe future. I've been doing lots of reflection and inner work on myself. I might mention some today. And I hope you also have achieved what you wanted to achieve in the beginning of this year. It might be a really good time as well to go back to your start of the year kind of goal setting process and see if those goals still resonate, see if you're on track or if anything needs to change. So today I have a super exciting episode. I've actually been thinking about recording it for probably 2 months because I want to talk about a book that I have read that I absolutely loved. And you know me, I read a lot of books, but this one really stood out for me. I found so much wisdom into it and so much truth. I think that's the word that really came to me, that I was so excited at every chapter that I was reading and highlighting, because I do that when something really resonates with me. I was thinking I need to come out here on this podcast and share it with you. I have recommended the book to quite a few of my clients, and I will say that I'm totally not an affiliate for this author. I have no link with her. I just happen to be really struck by the quality of her work and her thinking. In my opinion, because I don't know everything that's out there, but from what I know, that kind of thinking, the kind of thinking that is in that book and that this woman is advocating, is quite revolutionary. And it is, for me, amongst what I see, what is the most advanced thinking on women, on gender equality, and all those dynamics that we're facing today. You know, we had another International Women's Day, and so many of us feel like progress isn't fast enough. Well, if you read that book, you may find the inspiration and the energy to speed up that process. So the book is called A Radical Awakening, and it is by Dr. Shefali. So I'll link it in the show notes and just have a look. What I'm going to attempt to do today is convey the main themes, the main lessons and insight from the book. I am going to try to do justice to the author, but I really want to give you like that power shot of it. So if you don't have time to read it, you get some value. And if this resonates with you, then I really recommend you check it out and read it in full details for yourself. This book is not always for the faint-hearted. Like, she really has views that can be quite different from what the entire world is saying. And in that, I really salute her courage. I'd love to have her on the podcast. Who knows, maybe one day. But she doesn't mind being controversial. And I think that's what we need for women today. And we need like those kind of leadership, thought leadership that is really empowering and leading. But not just by saying it, but actually by demonstrating it. And that's what she does in this book. So essentially, the radical awakening that she is covering, she's using her own personal journey. And it really is like a transformation. And my podcast episode today will follow that. We'll talk about what is the before state, which is pretty much our current state. And I find collectively, most of us will resonate with it. And she's done work all around the globe and she finds the same common themes, whatever the race, the religion, the country, the industry, the level of education, like these things really resonate. So that's the before. And then she talks about why we're there and what we need to change. And then there's a whole section on the after and how to set yourself up. So to basically go through that awakening process. And that means you're going to transform yourself in the way you look at yourself, the way you look at your life. So this conversation is mostly for women and it is going to be really holistic. We're going to talk about career plus life. We're going to talk about you as a human being overall for your life. So I hope you're ready. Let's get into it. So the first part of the book that I'm going to try to paint a picture of very briefly is where she describes how essentially us as women, we have lost ourselves. We have lost our true essence, our true sense of self. And it is usually not our fault, by the way. But so it can be a bit confronting because she calls out some of our experiences, our feelings, and even though they may be true, they can be a bit uncomfortable to admit. But so that loss of self, how does it manifest according to her? And she calls that also a soul erosion. She says we have symptoms like the buffering that we do through what we eat, through what we drink. There's a lot of chronic fatigue. There is self-doubt. There is confusion. There is a lack of emotional connection. We may feel angry or irritable. We may be in purposeless jobs. So that's what she's describing. And she brings this back to the patriarchy. She says it's unavoidable because we were born women the way that the world is formatted and organized and institutionalized. Even before we're born, we're already kind of doomed and we have no other choice than to follow the system that there is. And that patriarchy turns us into slaves to fear. She says the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, of loneliness, of unworthiness. And based on that, we adjust and we quite often are silenced or we are silencing ourselves. And then we top that up with a layer of blame/shame about it that we feel and we rehash about ourselves. She says the more quiet, the higher the grade. Dr. Shefali states that we have that constant suppression of who we are as women happening since we're born, literally, because we are told to stay quiet. And we therefore have to suppress our authentic voices. And quite often we end up in dissociation with who we truly are. And this I see sometimes with my clients when we talk about what it is that they really want, how they're really feeling. I hear clients sometimes saying to me, I don't actually even think of myself. And so we all end up in that place because of the conditioning and end up crushing our sense of self-love. And it just puts us in that unconscious unworthiness. And if you look at it, all of us women, we share that around the world. And from that state, what we crave is what she calls the triple threat: approval, validation, and praise. Isn't it true that deep down, we all want that? The number of women that are here who don't feel valued, appreciated at work, what we're seeking in our homes with our partners, right? We all want that triple threat. So what do? Then we focus in our lives on being compliant and on being of service to others. And some of us even top that up with we focus on being excellent because we have been raised to be the most perfect version of ourselves. So essentially, because of that triple threat of approval, validation, and praise, we are trained to only exist in a particular context, not to exist in our own right. I'm going to read you an extract. She says, imagine if women everywhere began to speak their authentic truth about how it really feels to be who they are, including their fears and failures. Can you imagine the release of pressure we would feel? So that is currently not happening for most of us. And therefore, she says, women are lost. They are in that kind of fog. And she says it manifests through them being unable to create healthy boundaries, them being easily irritable, I've been there, them having low sexual desire, them having a clear lack of self-care, having a lot of busyness, but busyness without the meaningfulness of it, being overwhelmed, having the cycle of procrastination and self-sabotage, having a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety. This is all happening because of the way we were conditioned and because of the patriarchy and us just suppressing our core essence and just, as I said, complying and being of service to others. So that is the state that Dr. Shefali describes prior to her awakening. And you may be nodding as you're hearing that, and you may not feel like you need to awaken from anything. And that's why I said this could be confronting. But this is not our true nature. And the fact is, all of us are living that unconscious unworthiness and kind of that lie, really, about who we really are, that we don't even question it. And I hope even just today would just open that little window in your mind and start thinking about, where are you suppressing your authentic voice and who you are? And are you even dissociated from it, or are you connected with it? Okay, so now part 2. I want to cover what Dr. Shefali calls the lies that culture and society has imposed on us. And I think that is super interesting. Some of them can be controversial again, but she just goes for it and she lists them. So there you go. I'm going to give you a short, brief list. She said the first lie is that our unworthiness should be disguised as virtuosity. So in other words, the idea of self-sacrifice for women is good, is a virtue. Another one is the standard of goodness and beauty that there is in the world. Like, that's a lie, she says, because it's quite unattainable anyway, but that is just a standard that's been made up by someone. And it requires you to be more of what you're not, which is impossible. She obviously also talked about what it means to be a woman and all the stereotype and the molding that culture and society impose on us. As women, I don't need to tell you, if you're listening here, we all have to be beautiful and skinny, and we need to have children because otherwise you're not a normal woman. And all of this, before that was contained, she explains, within the family circle, even maybe extended family. But now, in the digital age that we live in, it's just amplified globally. Anyone, is just judging you on social media and giving you their opinion. So it's been massively amplified, all that cultural stereotyping. She also says that we are being completely shaped up by legacies and traditions coming from our family and sometimes our ancestors that literally dictate what clothes we wear, what religion we are to follow, what career paths are right and appropriate for us, even what marriage in some culture we need to enter. So even you're listening to this and you might feel like, no, you chose your career, when you think of it, those choices were somehow guided by your family, your ancestors, and the culture around you. Dr. Shefali also has some pretty strong words about marriage and divorce, where she says that the way marriage is depicted by society and culture is just like, it's wrong, is seen as like a contract that you cannot get out of, and that merely fulfills some social and religious standing. And for instance, that marriage praises longevity, she says, was this is actually a wrong measure of success in a marriage. It should be about growth. She also talks about how divorce is culturally manipulated into creating a sense of dread. You know, that stigma that you should not divorce. Therefore, for people to stay together and to retain that sense of control, even if they are utterly unhappy. And I felt that myself when I considered separating. And for years, I held myself back because I felt all this cultural belief that I took as my own. And she is right that seeing divorce that way is very disempowering. And the same happened in her personal story. And she realized she had all that baggage around divorce, and she decided to change it and to turn it around and to see her divorce as a release, as a next phase, as her actually not divorcing from her husband, but divorcing from the old version of herself that was putting up with things that were not authentic to herself. I really like that new perspective on divorce. I think we need to shake that up because there are plenty of people that divorce and it is better for them and it is better for their children. So why do we have the stigma? And even I'm just happy she's asking those really big, important questions around huge institutions in our social lives. She also talks about how sex is culturally perceived badly, especially for women, and something we don't talk about. Again, she said it's just one of those lies that culture has on us. And also she talks about patterns that we have adopted as a child, to feel loved, seen, and worthy. So examples are patterns of being perfect all the time, or patterns of avoiding conflicts, or people pleasing. So basically she's saying a lot of our motives don't come from our true self, but they rather come from those gaps inside of us, that inner need we have, and we need to be aware of those patterns. Dr. Shefali says that real power will come from us taking ownership of all those internal causes and their effects, and also seeing all those lies that culture, all those shaping that we have been subjected to, and decide what we want to shed, what we want to leave behind, and then entering the new, where everything is focused on authenticity. So now we're into the part where we are right in the middle of that transformation. We've covered the before and why. So how do we navigate that transition where we know we have been kind of asleep because we've been living under that unconscious conditioning coming from the fact that we're women, coming from culture and society. So now we know all of this. So what's the first step? And she says it is to confront the shadows. So what she means by the shadows are the different phases that our ego is taking in our lives. So for those of you that are not familiar with this terminology, the ego is that part of us, some call it the shadow. It's a very important part of us that exists and that should be there, that has formed from we were about age 7 or 8, when we started to feel those needs of we were not feeling seen, valued, loved enough, and therefore our ego made sense of that and created a lot of false belief about us, about the world, that we have been growing up with and still absolutely shape our adult life. So all of you, like me, we have an ego part that's been shaped up by childhood. And in the book, there's a fascinating section, I could do a podcast on it alone, but I won't, where Dr. Shefali describes a number of different masks or faces, you can call them archetypes, that we take on, that actually is our ego taking on, because of the way that we grew up and everything that I've just covered. And so she says it's important to become aware of which faces we used when, in order to then heal that side of the ego. So she describes, I think it's about 8 or 10 different masks, and she puts them under 3 categories: the givers, the controllers, and the takers. So these are all the ways we interact with our external world or with ourselves based on all the messages and the beliefs we have inherited from childhood. So that is a fascinating part of the book if you're interested in digging further. She says we waste a lot of energy on the outer world by using those protective behaviors, whether we give a lot, or whether we control a lot, or whether we take a lot. And instead, once we know all those different masks that we take, we can turn inwards, become aware of what we're doing, and release the ego. The ego is actually trying to protect us. It was there as a child for us to be protected because we didn't have our needs met appropriately. But now we're adults and we need to become responsible and confront that shadow. If this is a topic that interests you, I also highly recommend you follow the holistic psychologist. She talks a lot about how to learn to spot your ego, how to tell the difference between your ego and your higher self, and how to heal from those tendencies of your ego. So next up in that transition phase, once we have confronted those shadows, those masks that we use, she is talking about really owning our true self. And if there's a word that goes with this book, it's true. It's authenticity, which gets thrown around a lot these days. But in that book, I tell you what, she really walks her talk on it. So being your true self, she says, is about owning our feminine nature and especially our female body. She talks a lot about how it's designed and how we should embrace all of it. We should also embrace emotionally our nurturing side, because all of us are born mothers, whether we have children or not, but we have that mothering instinct in us. She also talks a lot about the differences, including at biological level, between men and women, in order to really show this is how we've been designed by nature and how we have to be and we have to behave. So I can't get into further details here, but there's some really interesting points. And she talks about having the wisdom of our differences versus men, whether it's at a biological level, it's a psychological level. So she is basically saying, women, just stop shaming yourself, start owning everything that you are physically, emotionally, mentally, and be really aware where you are versus men, and just own that. Okay, part 3. Are you still with me? I hope you're finding this fascinating as I have. So the last section of the book, which is, I found the most interesting one, is what she calls cracking the matrix. So she talks about the new way, all about authenticity. And I'm going to give you some key pointers, but each pointer, there's probably at least a big chapter under it. The first one, she says, we need to redefine motherhood. And she says it is less about our children's happiness and success, because so many of us project onto our kids, and more about our inner healing. Because she says it's another lie of society, the definition of motherhood, that we should be those all-encompassing, all-giving mothers. Society really puts high standards on motherhood, and as a result, a lot of us women end up losing our identity. And I see it so much with my clients, and I've always felt so compelled by this when I had my own daughter. I didn't want to lose my identity, and I felt all that societal pressure, and I saw everybody around me just like morphing into those all-giving mothers that meant so well. But I found that you just end up into that vacuum of motherhood and you lose your own sense of identity. And later down the track, it's so much harder to rebuild your identity, your confidence, getting back into work. And that is not your fault. That is society. So in the book, she talks about all of that. We have to stop that, and we have to stop expecting us to be perfect mothers, and instead really focus on being conscious parent and realize how much of our stuff we bring into motherhood and to not project them onto our children. Another way going forward to crack the matrix is the true acceptance of our bodies and to stop giving into the culture of beauty and everything being beautiful. She says we should just accept how things are and not call them beautiful when they're not beautiful. And we should stop tweaking and fixing our bodies to conform to the standard. I'm pretty sure you like that point. Next up, she talks about ditching the curse of niceness. So she says we have to choose to be authentic over being nice and over being loved. I think that is still a work in progress for women these days. She describes what she calls toxic femininity, where she said actually it's coming from that patriarchy, and women are so used to reduce themselves to silence, it's a learned behavior, that they become conflict averse, they become quite fragile, independent, all that extreme where you've lost so much of yourself and you've been overridden so much for so long, and there's a lot of anxiety that you just end up being that empty shell of yourself. So she said instead, we should re-own all that side of femininity that we have, and we should also not be afraid of having some masculine energy. And she said, namely, we need to redefine our relationship with anger, because apparently it's okay for men to be angry, but not for women. So I agree, there are a lot of what you would call feminist themes in her book, but it's coming from a psychological approach, and I think that is really powerful. So she said, we need to pretty much own being in the no energy and not allowing men to get away with abusive or predatory behaviors. And I really like this idea that we need to be comfortable with the anger, because I think that's the problem behind the no. We think we're going to be labeled a bitch, that we're going to be toxic. But no, we just need to be that. It's part of our makeup as human beings. Next up is the concept of inner authorship. So we need to be our own main driver, our own main source of reliability, and we need to protect ourselves. So that's about creating boundaries, which is a theme I talk a lot about in this podcast, not to be a pushover and not to be silenced. So she says basically we have to learn to tolerate others' disapproval, which you can do when you have inner authorship. Because when you do, you value yourself. Like the love you have for yourself is more important than the love that other people give to you. And I have experienced that myself since I've been a single mom, that actually I have rebuilt my sense of self-love. And that is number one. And that carries me through everything. And it's way more reliable and more powerful than external love that you get from people. And to do that, she says, you need to be comfortable being alone, which I have spoken about as well in this podcast. So this is all about coming back to yourself and not having any excuses. She talks about the no excuse zone for others and for yourself. That idea of boundaries is always there. And then to feel deserving of respect, of patience, of loyalty, of care, of attention, of honesty, of wealth, of self-care, of relaxation, of being in the spotlight if you happen to be on a stage somewhere, of being loved and being honored. And as you're hearing me saying all that list of things, I'm sure you know deep down this is what you deserve and it feels right because it's our core essence. But is it manifesting in your life right now? Is it your experience? Probably not for a lot of us. So it will start from that inner authorship and having that no excuse zone and feeling that way about ourselves. And then the last couple of points she makes is about being self-accountable, so not expecting someone else to come and do it for you, to be responsible for you or for your happiness. Like she talks about in relationship and in marriage, like society tells us the story that the other person is going to complete us, which she says is complete garbage. And I think we are starting to all know this. and feel this. So the accountability is on you to make yourself happy. Therefore, we have to stop putting the blame on other people. And she says, everything we see is the result of our creation. It's the result of our minds. And that is really a big lesson to hear and to take in and to digest. But I believe it's true. And then she talks about self-compassion. And that is about ourselves. She said, we need to learn to love the parts of ourselves that are not great. We talked about those shadows, the ego side of us that manifest, and just to accept that it's there and that we are imperfect. And as we do this, we release others to be perfect as well. And we have compassion for others being the way that they are. And finally, she talks about reparenting yourself, which is also a topic Dr. LaPiera from The Holistic Psychologist talks about in her book, How to Do the Work, how we're all waking up that as adults we are reproducing patterns coming from our childhood. You may have heard about the inner child. So here it's about releasing the past, and that includes releasing our resentment towards our parents. And that is something I have had to work on in the last year. Because when I separated, for me, all those things, all my inner child behaviors and patterns came out, which is really interesting. And so she says we need to reparent ourselves. And by that, it's about seeing the circumstances where we act in a childish manner, she says. And because it's our inner child being triggered and hasn't been healed. So it's about asking ourselves, what do I need right now? And becoming aware we're reacting because of a past memory or past belief, and that we can now treat ourselves like the full, resourceful, mature, emotionally mature adult that we are, and we can choose differently. So she says, and I'll leave you with that quote, there is no one out there who knows me more than I do. I have the answers within me. So here you go. That was the book in a nutshell. I hope that it wasn't too much. I hope it was really interesting and it sparked some thoughts for you. I just want to recap that it's about that transformative process from the before and understanding that we live under that fog and that lie, and we have shaped our behaviors to cope with, especially as women, the way that we were born into this world, into the transformative part in the middle where we need to be familiar with our shadow self and the faces of our ego, and fully embracing our true self and reconnecting with that sense of our true self. And then the third stage being cracking the matrix, like absolutely changing the way we manage our lives. And that goes through boundaries, through trusting ourselves above everything else and building that self-love, feeling deserving of so many of those good things, and having self-accountability, self-compassion. I know it's a lot, right? But that's what those books are there for. They're so inspiring, and I think I will get back to mine over and over. And even if you just read like one chapter, you will get so much out of it. So essentially, it's about realizing all the shaping and the imposition that comes from our past onto our adult life, and connecting to ourselves differently now today. And that's really that awakening that she talks about, that radical awakening. And then know that you have your own back and trust your inner voice. So I know we hear a lot of that. You hear, you got to be confident, you got to trust yourself, have your own back, go and speak up. But it might feel so hard to attain, right? Concretely. You're like, how do I do that? Because I don't feel that. I find that book really gives you the context and the tools to understand why you feel and act the way that you do. And it gives you the path forward. And if you dare to walk on it and experience it for yourself, you can just take everything she says and try it for yourself and see what difference it makes. I really personally identify a lot with her journey, and maybe this is no stranger to the fact that I also separated, and I'm not saying we all need to awaken and we all need to separate, far from it, but we all need to be authentic. And a lot of my clients, that's what's really sitting at the core of the approach and why they come to me, is because somewhere it's just been too much, that not being your true self, not having what you want, not being fulfilled. And that's good when you get to that point. You're like, okay, enough. And you often need the guidance, you need the support, because it's so anchored in you, and so many other people are also following the same tracks. So we need some hacks, we need some help to think differently. And that's where coaching is really powerful, whether it's career, it's life, and it's something I can definitely help you with. So if you enjoyed this episode, and if you want to read the book, even you read it and you think, wow, I feel so ready for change in my life, this is the right place. Just go to my website, careercatchup.com, and just have a look at the different services, coaching programs that I offer, and see what feels right to you. I really hope today open up your mind like it did for mine about what it's like to be a woman today, what's right, what's true about ourselves, all the possibilities that await if we show up authentically as ourselves. So have a beautiful week, everybody. Take care of yourself and think long and deep about how much you are deserving and what the true you really wants and how beautiful it is. I'll speak with you soon. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to find out more information, you can visit my website at careercatchup.com. There you will find blog articles, free resources, a self-study course for your career direction, and ways to work with me. It's at careercatchup.com. I hope to continue to connect with you and support you. Talk to you soon.